went back and went back and sent
This command is not authorized.
Okay, do I still have folks from the old conference line connected?
I'm on the old conference line.
Yes.
This is Charles.
I was on it, this Kathy, but it cut me off, so I had to come in on the other one, the new one.
Okay, thank you.
Y'all still working at it?
Yeah, for some reason I've got people coming in and out of the new Zoom line that we've connected.
Okay. All right. I haven't had any problem on the old line, but that's the one I'm on. We the only ones on the old line.
Must be Charles.
The old, the new are all supposed to merge, don't it?
Yes, sir, but I think one of our lines disconnected on us. I've been trying to get it back. I'm asking Sheldon for help.
Okay.
This morning we connected 3 different lines, and then we lost one. This will get easier once we move to our permanent number. But we were trying to connect everybody, and it's just been challenging.
And that's on the new line that Red gave us last Sunday.
There's actually another one. We're gonna Yeah, we're going to stop using the conference line, actually, and we're going to be using Zoom phone number to connect. Previously, we've been connecting 2 phone numbers each time we get together.
Okay.
And we're going to simplify and save some money by switching to Zoom.
So when everybody come on next time, just come on Zoom.
Yeah, we're going to give you the new number today, if we can get started.
Okay.
Religion has done the opposite. Religion never put us in a position where we saw ourselves as in a position of power. It was always relying on external things to help us. It never really put us in a position of seeing ourselves powerful beings we are. It just sort of did the opposite. It sort of put us in a position of relying on things externally. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, sir. I hate to interrupt you, but I wanted to go back to Ron before we delve deeper into the numbering side of it, okay?
Okay.
Ron.
The question that Ron raised about big part.
Yeah, we actually haven't been with you guys. The folks on the conference line and the folks on the new Zoom line got disconnected from the old Zoom line, and we missed the entire conversation. We were disconnected somehow just after Ron started speaking.
Pastor Richard is aware. We were waiting for Ron to get back on so we could pick up from there. So all of us are back on now.
Yeah, all of us are back on. I wanted to get back to that question because I wanted to add something to what S was saying. So, Ron, would you please restate your question?
And Ron, you may need to dial *6 to unmute yourself because I see that you're muted in Zoom. There you go.
Okay. So the mute button won't work anymore. I'm going to have to go to *6 from here on out since we're using that Zoom to mute and unmute.
No, you can use the mute button on your phone. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just mentioning that I listened to part of last Saturday's session, and S mentioned something about ending racism and unifying everyone, and I just asked him to go into that a little bit. And he was talking about that, and when we seem to have dropped the call.
Yeah,
I just want to
add something.
Yeah.
I was my reply to that was the way I said that was the reason I said that was so that we could realize our connection. But first, to get to that connection, we had to learn and support ourselves and understand who we are and function as Elohim. And then once we got to that level, it would be easier for us to connect with other people who have begun to understand who they were. And the more we operated together as Elohim, it would help us see each other as equal, because that was coming from an internal place where in the past we've been trying to fix these things externally And although you get external wisdom and solutions, those things don't necessarily continue to unify us and help us see each other as equals, because the more we rely on external factors, there's a chance that there's going to be an error, or we're going to see things from an external eye that also, impairs our judgment, or just leads us down the path of making mistakes. So it's better from us to operate from a place of internal strength to help bolster that connection. And once we begin to see each other as truly equal and as Elohim, understanding and feeling that connection, then it would be easier to eliminate things like racism, separatism, because we're all operating as Elohim, and that bond and that connection is real, and we feel it. Pastor had something else to add to that as well.
Yes, I heard the first part of Ron's question was talking about what about the other people who are not aware of who they are. I think that's what it was. And I wanted to respond to that by go ahead, by saying that we are in the process of seeing the results of our desires, as well as our embracing the reality of being Elohim. How that works is that when we talk about putting things in the macro, when events take place, like what's taking place now in the Ukraine, when we look at events like that, we begin to see the differences in how people are treated. And we have put it in the macro enough about racism for other people to begin to speak to that. Angelina Jolie spoke last week about, she said that her heart goes out for the Ukrainians. However, all refugees should be treated the same. And she referenced Venezuela and African refugees in particular. And she never was on again. He never put her back on air again with those remarks. What was she saying? She's saying that because of what we are seeing in the Ukraine, it gives opportunity for us to do a comparison so that we can see the differences in how people are treated in the same circumstances. This in itself begins to awaken in other people their sense of balance in terms of how we treat each other. These are the things that we begin to see in the natural as a result of what we are doing spiritually. Will everyone come to the place where they understand that they are Elohim? No, they won't. That's why there are leaves on the tree of healing in the garden. That's why it speaks of that. Because there are always going to be those who need to be guided. However, when the dominant energy is that of unicity amongst humanity, then we begin to see less and less of a difference in the treatment of people based upon their national origin or skin color, for that matter. Because another thing that happened last week that points to that is the Polish opened their doors to people who were coming from the Ukraine until they found out some of them were of African origin. And many of them would not accept them because of the color of their skin. So we are affecting everything in this world in terms of bringing balance to it. There is absolutely nothing that's taking place that is not influenced by the energy that we are constantly putting into the macro. Not only the 3 days that we're on, but also as we live our lives and honest about who we are. That's pretty much what I wanted to add to that. However, if there are questions, pertaining to that, I don't mind answering them or clarifying.
Well, this is Charles. I believe what you're saying. And not only that, because I was getting ready to ask you, what about the one that wakes up with the energy of taking a stand and the one who hadn't woke up, they got to be guided. So when you spoke that, it took me back to Israel. Not Israel, to the wilderness. Because Moses was guiding them. His energy was covering them. So it's just like, it's going to take that person that have the energy of Elohim, don't woke up, you're going to have to guide the ones that don't know. Just like you were just talking about it. You understand what I was getting at? Because through the wilderness, those people couldn't go themselves or whatever. Moses had to guide them.
And those who refused the leadership died in the wilderness. There would be quite a few people who died in the wilderness. I don't want us to miss what's going on. Let's understand something. Well, I don't want to get into the weeds of Ukraine, but the whole issue with what's happening in Ukraine started 50 or more years ago, maybe close to 100. I don't know. However, I do know what the timeline has been that led us to where we are now, and where we are now is bringing an end to that timeline of separation of people based on race or national origin, or for gender, for that matter. And so I don't want to get into the weeds of that, because it may pull us from where we are. However, if you're comfortable with that, I will. Okay, I'm done.
One of the things you still described there, Travis, what we talked about last weekend, and how we looked at the role that religion played, or if you're being influenced externally, we talked about the Colossian scripture where it talked about being led by a philosophy down a road that ends in death. In other words, if you are on the path of trying to do it for yourself, it means that you're just following a certain philosophy that doesn't teach you anything, that doesn't help you grow as the person you are. That philosophy is always having you function and operate externally, waiting on someone to direct you, or some source to move things or create a situation for you, versus understanding that we are the internal creator. So those people are still operating on a philosophy that allows them to see folks in a certain light. And one of the scriptures that I pulled up today kind of tells us how Jesus dealt with that, and how he asked change those his philosophy and what we have to do, when he talked about just they need milk. But that's what we sort of talked about last week, in regard that people who follow a certain philosophy, when we talked about Mitch McConnell and used that example last week, that philosophy allows them to go down a different road, and which is the opposite road to what we're trying to travel, if that makes sense.
Hey, S. You and Nick were in conversation last Saturday, and you said something you or Nick did that I really loved, and I want you to get back to that as well. And predict might be my word, it may not be yours. But you talked about, Nick was talking about meditation and how important that was. And we talk about meditation a lot. but you made it sound like you get to a place of where you can almost predict your future or see your future, and that kind of caught my attention. You didn't quite put it that way. I take that to mean that you move to a place where you in balance and so comfortable in that nothing surprises you, nothing takes you off guard, and you're ready to move in any direction or deal with anything. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, and even on Monday night, to go a step further, past put in perspective that our past is actually our future. But what happens is that you're so connected to your source, your power, and you understand that what happens is that you understand your past, you understand what was done with the groundwork laid in front of you. But what also happens is that now your intuition is so sharp, you sharpen it that you can almost see things coming because you understand what's happened before, and what you've dealt with. That wisdom kind of leads you to just a clearer, I said clairvoyant or forecasting, because, for instance, we use the example of driving. If you understand the past, how accidents happen, usually it's what a distracted driver. A lot of times there's a distracted driver somewhere. So if your eyes are focused further down the road, you can actually see things that are going to happen in front of you, and you're able to make the proper adjustment. You have time to make the proper maneuver or reaction time. Your reaction time is a lot greater than it would. But that's only developed from the wisdom of the past as well. So you're giving yourself a longer view of what's right in front of you, even though it's because of what you've done behind you, if that makes sense. And Greg did a good job of kind of talking about that Monday. It's just so from the past, if I'm looking down, that's not a good thing. If I'm not looking on the road, if I'm not looking, ahead of me, because that's coming. But but it's from the experience you've brought. It helps you, be smarter about driving, and actually having your eyes further down the road allows you that time. So that was kind of the example I used about just giving yourself enough time to react and maneuver. I think Audrey also had an example of Barbara, someone, coming towards her, but she was more aware and able to react, if that makes sense.
Yes, this is Barbara. I know that this intuition, we can have this sense of what will happen. In dreams, what are some other ways that intuition manifests itself in us, or unfolds itself to us?
And it comes in connections. For instance, if you've met someone who's reached the same level of connection that you have, you feel it really quick. If you meet somebody that you're kind of not suspicious about, but you don't gravitate to them immediately, you take your time in dealing with that person. So even with just interacting with people on day in and day basis, I come across people that I feel more comfortable with versus someone who I'm not as comfortable with, and I have to understand a little more about them. So it manifests its way in that. It also manifests its way in how soon we, for lack of a better term, make a decision on something. You can be faster on deciding something that's right there in front of you, because sometimes opportunities come and we don't necessarily answer them. But it also helps you to make the best opportunity for yourself, because if we're operating as Elohim and we make that decision based on that, then it's going to be the right decision. We're not always going to see the immediate results or understand it right then, but when we're operating as that, it gives us so much time to we're not even worried about it. So you're actually, when you feel like you're not even worried and you're above certain things, because you know how you're operating, where they just don't matter. And even today, when we start talking about this memories and recall, it's just the intuition aspect of it, the way these things are all combined. It just helps our day in and day out function of who we're supposed to be. But I would say, for me, I know I feel differently about certain people when I meet them now, and I know, and it's always been there, but I know who I feel comfortable with versus who I don't, if that makes sense.
So is it similar then to vibrations? You can pick up on vibrations and sense differences. Let me give you an example. My sister and I went to a restaurant and we sat at a table, and it was next to two individuals who happened to be Caucasian women. And my sister and I looked at each other and we said, "Do you feel that?" And she said, "Yes, I feel that." It was like an intense feeling of dis-ease, in a sense. So is that part of what you are describing as intuition as well?
Yes, and believe it or not, even that other person, thing that influences their intuition is a little different too, because I've been in that situation where I sat down and you're like, okay, I don't really think about it all the time. But then have you ever sat down beside someone and they feel so uncomfortable about you sitting beside them or in the same place as them, that they're at the point of being uncomfortable enough to where their intuition leads them to try and initiate an awkward conversation with you, to the point that you feel like they're just trying too hard and to get themselves comfortable, if that makes sense. And so it does. You do feel that vibration. You do feel that relationship with certain people in one regard or the other. Because I've been there, just like you said. You feel that, and it's like, okay, and it's our job at that point to kind of saying anything. Not just being who you are and operating who you are in that moment. But I have been there to where, like, all of a sudden it's just an awkward conversation that they try to initiate to actually make themselves feel better.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
So what do you do when you feel that vibe from another individual or individuals? When you feel the uncomfort, when you're feeling uncomfortable.
At that point, if I feel them being uncomfortable, it's really not for me to do anything to them. I just continue to be myself. And the longer they sit there, sometimes they become comfortable, because I don't know if it's a threat or if it's just an uneasy feeling of they're just not accustomed to it, whatever it may be. It's really not my job to make them feel uncomfortable, to feel comfortable. The only thing I need to do is just be me and do what I need to do, and sort of let the situation unfold organically and not necessarily force one way or the other, because that goes back to what Charles said last weekend. Unless I just feel a strong need to interject and to do something to alleviate the situation or make it better, I'm going to be me at that moment in time, and everything else, just trust that maybe they'll leave and say, "Oh man, I had a good experience," But at that point, if I don't feel the need to interject or just something that makes me move towards some sort of action, I'll just at that point just be me, and that goes back to the benefits we have of operating as Elohim, being that perspective that no matter what we come in contact with, we're being that perspective of God in the earth, and let the chips fall where they may. But unless you feel a need to interject, just be yourself.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
This idea, the discomfort that you feel and how you respond is based upon the source of the discomfort. If your discomfort, for example, is sensing a violent nature in that person or people, you respond differently than you do simply because somebody is uncomfortable being around you because they don't know you that well, or because they have been told things about you that's not true. It depends on the source. The next thing is, what I see is that there is never a time when you are not functioning as Elohim once you embrace it. There are periods when you make an error, and that you're learning how to function as Elohim. Is teaching you how to avoid those pitfalls that you have been taught were true. So when we embrace this reality, it's not that we function today and we're not going to do it tomorrow. We do it every day of our lives. It's no different than a teaching school. If you are a teacher, you are going to make mistakes. But that does not mean that you cease to be a teacher. You are functioning as a teacher regardless of the mistakes you make. So that same principle applies to our being Elohim. We can't look at it like operating or functioning as though it is a separate entity from our being or from who we are. That's just simply who we are. James Richard makes mistakes, but it doesn't mean that I am not James Richard. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes.
Yes.
And I wasn't going to bring the scripture up right now at this point, but I think it's a good point to kind of interject it, and especially when it comes from the teaching aspect, because we're all teachers, and when we realize and operate and aware of who we are, it makes it a little easier. But this was the scripture that I was talking about earlier when we were, we first started with Hebrews 5. It's verse 10 through 12. I didn't know where to actually, it's just something that came up, and I didn't know where to actually put it at without going down this road. If we go to Hebrews 5, 10 through 12, and it reads, it says, being designated by God as high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, concerning him, he has much to say, and it's hard to explain since you have become dull of hearing. Although by this time you ought to be teachers, you have a need again for someone to teach you elementary principles and articles of God, and you have to come to them, and milk is needed and not solid food. It's taught, like you're almost, babies need milk, and so when you get to the point, we all have to go to that point of where we didn't truly understand everything that was going on. We didn't really feel it. We kind of sat and we were being preached to and not enlightened or opened up. And so now when you come across someone who has just been basically closed and dull and following a different philosophy, you take baby steps with them. You treat them like a babe almost, because we all had to go to a point where we started out as infants and we started out on milk, and a baby with no teeth is not ready for steak or pork chops. They've got to be nourished slowly and at an infant stage and starting out. And so we all at some point had to come to that reality for ourselves, and that's sort of what we do when we meditate. We go back to just opening ourselves up in this infant-like form, and you want to be nourished and get to the point to where you're ready for all that food. But if someone's not ready for it, if they're not able to receive what you can give them, don't try to give it to them all at once. Sometimes the milk is just, like Pastor said, just be Elohim, operate as Elohim. Sometimes that may be the milk for that person sitting beside you, or the uncomfortability. Like, you just can't always try to give someone solid food. Go ahead, Pastor. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I want to look that 13th verse says that for everyone that uses milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe.
Yeah.
So at some point, we have to stop perceiving ourselves as being babes, because being skilled in the words of righteousness is based upon what lack of skill looks like. And all of us have experienced those who are not skillful in the words of righteousness. They are skillful in regurgitating what they have been told with no understanding of it at all. However, at some point, we are going to have to stop making excuses about being babes in the words of righteousness. If you make a mistake, that does not mean you're not skillful. It means you made a mistake. I do not feel that I'm unskillful in the words of righteousness. I do believe that because of my embracing who I am and understanding that, I am extremely skillful in the words of righteousness. That's not boast, that's reality. And at some point, each of us are going to have to embrace that. Because if we don't embrace it, then we will remain babes. Why? Because you are what you perceive yourself to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and if anyone is on that wasn't on last week or didn't hear the call last week, that's why I got to the point, where I kept overemphasizing that it's something that's self-taught, that at some point we have to go in and internalize this and bring it from the inside of our own self as an individual. And that's where, what the pastor just described, that's the difference between going to a different level and operating on a different level of intuition versus, staying at one certain level, seeing yourself a certain way, because it's something that, the ingredients are there. And at some point we have to go in as an individual and internalize that wisdom and sharpen our intuition. And it's a constant sharpening. Like, Jesus did it constantly. He always internalized. He got stronger from a wisdom standpoint, intuition standpoint, because he embraced who he was and he constantly went to himself. So it's if you weren't on the call last week, that's one of the key points we made, is that it's something that we have to do for ourselves at some point. And the best, the most efficient way of doing that is really learning how to meditate, quiet the things around you, so that you can build that strength from an internal standpoint, and start eliminating some of the internal natures that influence us. And like Pastor said, doesn't mean things are going to be perfect, but you reduce your errors the stronger your intuition gets, the stronger you sharpen your wisdom and you believe in yourself. You start reducing those errors, and part of what we do is we go on memory, we go on what we've seen in the past, we go on past influences, tap into other people's strengths because we've seen what they're able to do. And if sometimes we say, well, Jesus has put, he's our brother and he can do this, we can do it. If you're at the point where you're an infant, it may need to be that, well, hey, I've seen Kathy do this, Kathy influenced me doing, but whatever it takes to build it up initially to get yourself on that path, we have to do it at some point. It's not going to come from the external. Any comments or questions there?
So, S, I have a question then. When Barbara, I'm sorry, you.
Go ahead, I'll ask the question in a moment.
Okay, so when Barbara was talking about she and her sister at the restaurant and they felt a different vibe from the other people who were at the other table, we bring, when we greet each other, we're talking about the eighth sense, and it's all about connection, right? So when Barbara was there, she and her sister and the other people, were they transferring something to each other? Or, yeah, that's my question. Were they transferring something to each other? It had to be something where they met there at the same time and they were close to each other. That's my question.
It could have been, and Barbara may be able to answer it, but without me speaking for her, but I think it sounded more like they sensed that they're sensing their intuition. They sensed that there was external apprehension their way, and it just sounds like just from because we all have intuition. It's just a matter of how strong is it to us, how sharp is it. But it sounded like they just sensed a certain uneasiness from their surrounding or something. But it's not something I think they projected on the folks that sat next to them. Barbara, if that, I don't want to speak for you.
I think what we did was we calmed ourselves. In other words, once you feel that and you acknowledge it and you deal with it, because we were able to sit there and eat. Now, what I am thinking, because we are so connected, whatever was going on with those folks, and the word I said intense vibrations, but the word that came to us at the time was evil. It was just so. The more we sat there, once we acknowledged it, and we even prayed with each other, I'm sensing that they had to start picking up on some of the vibes we were given too, because that's what we're supposed to do when we connect. We're supposed to be able to even calm or reduce the external vibrations of others as well. Because once we sat there, we were calm, we prayed, and then we were calm, we were able to eat. No indigestion afterwards tells me that it worked. They sat there and there was a decrease in a sense. In other words, if we had not felt a decrease in that vibration, we would have gotten up and left because it was just so very intense.
Okay, thank you.
I have one, Ed.
Yeah, go ahead. When
I was in the hospital and I had head trauma real bad, this nurse I felt a connection to, and she was getting me through my head trauma. The days, the weeks, the months, the years. I mean, I had lost that. And gradually was coming back. And this great big old tall, she was every bit of close to 7 foot tall woman. And I was saying, man, she's tall. But when she got closer to me, I feel hurt a little bit. My spirit was pricked from her energy. And I didn't understand at that time. But the more she came over and just started talking, it seemed like it was just rubbing me like sandpaper. And she said, I'm gonna try to get you with me so I can help you out with your mind, problems and trying to get you to focus right. And everything she was saying, it didn't settle with me. And I said, no, ma'am, I think I'll stick with the lady. I will. I'm more comfortable with it. And that way, she will be able to help me more. But she didn't want to leave it like that. She went and tried to go over the woman's head to get me with her. And I said within myself, I don't know what this lady's trying to do, but whatever she's trying to do, I just hope. So I didn't say hope. It ain't gonna work because I'm not comfortable with her. I don't feel like it's just something there. She's just trying to pull me away from get all my faculties back. So she tried everything in the book, but I was still holding on to what I was learned and taught. To all that, because during that time, my spirit was very open. And she tried all she could, but she couldn't. And I didn't see that woman no more during that time I was in the hospital. So the vibe that you pick up from, the intuition, the feeling, all these things that you sense in your body, your aura, is teaching you how to operate in Elohim. All of them not bad things. It's just there to teach you. Just like in the Hebrew, what you just read. You sooner or later, you ain't gonna be able to drink milk if you're gonna be able to do these things that God has for you to do.
Yeah, and that's
all I can say.
I appreciate it, Charles. The thing that you just stated and what Barbara stated, and the thing I wanted to emphasize from both of your point of view is that was a situation that you felt it, and you couldn't handle it externally by verbally dealing with it, but you both handled it from an internal perspective. You handle it from within yourself, within who you operate as on a day in, day out basis, instead of trying to handle it externally. And that's a big difference there. That's why it's so important for us to operate a certain way and understand who we are at all times and handle things internally from, because your strength, your influence internally is a much greater power than just handling it externally. And that was, what I saw in both cases there is that you're able to handle those things from an internal you instead of, getting into a verbal altercation or creating a different situation. Instead, you just created a situation of peace internally that kind of took care of an external problem, external pressure. And that's what we talked about last week too. The eighth sense allows us to operate and balance the two natures it allows us to operate in the dominant nature of the internal presence, and allows you to kind of balance between the relationship between those two natures, and that's what happens. And so when you go down the other path, you're not using that intuition, you're not using that eighth sense to actually help you balance that relationship. You're trying to control and manipulate it externally, and it may not be the best solution. So that's a good example of trying to handle it in an internal way. And even going back to Ron's original question, I hope those examples too kind of put a little more insight and answer the question that you had earlier, Ron.
Yeah. It seems like every week I think about the scripture where Joshua talks about he's getting ready to cross the Jordan. He says we've never been this way before. It seems like as we grow, we're moving to different landscapes and seeing different things, and it is no doubt in my mind that the energy that Barbara and her sister put out through their prayer and meditation had an influence on those women. And you're right, it made me think about what you said earlier about unifying with others. I think what Barbara was feeling was how sensitive she is to where we are, the situation, and that uncomfortableness that the others felt too, because if Barbara felt that from her, they were uncomfortable too. They were uncomfortable to put out that type of energy, that is not going away. There is no such thing as the normal anymore, as we have known it in the past. And as long as we keep plowing fields like that, you are assured that there will be some uncomfortableness in the land. But as what just happened, I think that's a beautiful example of everything you've taught. As through that, she was able to inject positive energy into whoever these people were. So, I think it's a beautiful example and kind of supports everything that we've said. And it may be something that we're going to have to get used to until we move to that intuitive place that you have described, where we can see and predict our future or know what's coming and be that balanced that we're comfortable with it. Comfortable with before it happens. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
About this right here. There's another part of Hebrew that like it talks about when you face a situation. God talks about placing His radiance of glory and His exact imprint of His nature on the situation. Think about this call, the foundation, greater than faith, and just look at the environment we create for ourselves every weekend, and that's a direct imprint on how we go out during the week as well. I'm not trying to separate them, but just think about the environment we create for ourselves every weekend. And then you look at how we as individuals go out and put our imprint on this world every day during the week, and with interactions and everything. But that's just the environment we've created and imprinted on everybody that listens to these calls. And so now flip that. If you're somewhere else in the environment that's created there every weekend, in what you do and go out, and if that's based on you operating based on external reactions, you're going to go out, your week's going to look differently versus someone, you're learning and building yourself up in an environment that teaches us to be internally, hungry for knowledge and truth. That comes in, we motivated from an internal perspective to gain as much as we can, but also be it, once we learn it and understand it, be that information versus always going out and trying to combat things from an external perspective. You just get two different responses, two different reactions, and that's just once we understand that we're the key, and we have to master this individually, and that individual mastery helps the group's mastery, and it just we come in line with each other, we line up, energy lines up, the thoughts line up, and then the creations line up, because we always are creating things based on what we're thinking and putting into this reality. But if it's done from a place internally, understand that we're Elohim functioning that way, you're just going to get a better result. It's going to be a better imprint, a better representation of God and the earth versus trying to do things externally. You can't do it from the outside in and then expect it to look like God. We got to do it from the inside out, and because that's where it is. But I just wanted to add that to what you said, Ron.
Ed, I want to address, when you talk about mastery, I don't want us to think that means we have arrived.
No.
Mastery simply means that we are dedicated to what we're doing, because regardless of how a surgeon has mastered his craft, he's always still learning.
Right.
There is never a time where we get to a point where we know enough that we don't have to learn more.
Right.
And that's one of the major mistakes in religion. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, this is Audrey, good morning. So all those kinds of things that happened to BJ and that happened to Charles, can we say those kinds of things happen to help us tune in and pay attention and gain experience so that we understand what it is and how to deal with it? Because a weird thing that happens to me, that has happened to me, is like I'll be in the grocery store or somewhere, and we're just walking down the aisles doing my shopping, and this certain person will catch my attention. And we won't necessarily interact or anything, maybe say hello, how you doing, or whatever. But then I'll continue my shopping, and then we'll end up in the same checkout line, either right behind one in front of the other or something like that. And I'll go, that's weird. And then I'll walk out the store, and this person is either parked right beside me or somewhere 1 or 2 cars away from me. And that happens to me a lot. And I have never known exactly what to do with it. I still don't. But now I just kind of go with the flow. It doesn't weird me out as much as it used to. So now I just kind of go with the flow and kind of like I'm preparing myself for whatever is going to come. And I guess in that sense, I can kind of predict the future to a certain extent, if you understand what I mean. But I think we have these experiences to sort of help us understand what it is we're dealing with, and then to help us have experience so that we can know how to handle it when a situation arises that we need to, I guess, handle it, for lack of a better way to put it. But in that situation, is that also intuition playing a role?
Yeah, there's some sort of connection there. And then when you said that, I just thought it was something that happened to me yesterday, but similar. I was in a store and I was trying to find this cable, and but I also knew I needed to get back home by a certain time with some hamburger meat. So I went into the store in the same section trying to find this cable, and I saw this lady and her kids sitting there, and they were just kind of looking. And I got it, and I said, okay, I gotta hurry up and I had to drive down the road to the Ingles. So I'm going to get this meat and get out. When I run in the store, park, I go in, hear the same lady running there, and at the same time, we're grabbing up the same thing and then heading back out to the car. Never seen her before. Never said a word to her, but I just noticed, it's like, oh, I just saw her in the other store. So we go from electronics to hamburger meat, and I was like, what's the coincidence of that? So I can't explain it from that standpoint, other than maybe there's sort of a combination, a connection of things that you're doing the same thing on the same day at the same time, just in a different location that you're going to end up in. But I couldn't, when you said that, I thought about that. I was like, okay, we're moving from electronics to both going to get, hamburger meat out of the store or whatever we were getting out of the Ingles. So, that's interesting, because you do feel that and see that happen all the time, even with vehicles and people that are driving by. It's just, are we passing each other's path for that moment in time for some reason after?
You're always in the classroom. Things like that teaches you to be aware of your surroundings, but not only that, it teaches you to listen with more than your ears. You're paying attention. I guarantee you that there were several times prior to that those things happened and you really paid any attention. However, now you're in a place where you are functioning as you were created to function, and those things you pay attention to, and they speak to the idea of you being me and I'm you, that all of us are one. So it's just sharpening your skills as being able to not only observe your surroundings. The next thing to that is understanding what they mean. There will be things that happen that you don't understand at the moment, but because you're observant, it will be shown to you. That's actually how I look at everything that's happening in the world. It started the same way you guys are talking, and now it's at a place where it doesn't take much for me to observe what's happening and see what the meaning of it. That's a part of functioning as Elohim. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to put something out there as trying to look at bridging the gap or transition into sort of a memory talk a little bit, but also want to be a good transition. But what I've seen here the last couple of weeks is this evidence, because this lesson kind of forces you to kind of really look at different scriptures from different times, different writers' perspective. But for whatever reason, it seems to connect, whether it's Colossians, Hebrews, Genesis. It seems to connect. And the one thing I saw through all of these men and people that we have studied so far, David, John, and Paul writing, but the thing is, God made a promise and a prophecy, and it says it's not gonna be changed. It's, from David's perspective, the Lord has shown, and it will not change his mind. They talked about this when he was talking about the priesthood there. But it seems like everyone has made a promise and a prophecy. Well, God has made a promise and prophecy, and everyone before us has honored that and taken that status, no matter what their situation was, be it imperfect, scribes, but whatever, David, Abraham, and they've taken that status and they've accepted it. And I think going back to what you said earlier about us being, sometimes people being content with being infants and not wanting to grow, I think that's one of the biggest things that we've got to do, is accept our status, anointing, whatever you want to look at it as, but get to the point where we accept that status. And the reason I'm saying that is just because when we start talking about this, the different aspects of memory and how to pull that and use that to sharpen our intuition and how to get us closer to operating in a sense, it makes sense. So, and I just realized this question I'm about to ask, I've never thought about it that way until I started looking at it this week. The question is memory physical and spiritual? Just think about it for a second. Is your memory physical and spiritual?
Say again,
Are your memories, can it be physical and spiritual?
yes.
Isn't intuition kind of like a spiritual memory?
Yeah, but both. And since Rev answered, I was surprised that the answer is yes, that our memories are physical and spiritual. And I didn't realize until just looking at this that was one of the biggest hurdles that I had to overcome individually from a spiritual growth perspective, was because what I had been taught early on and just going to church early on as a youngster, that really messed up my memory and recall. It put me in a bad position. And so religion had me operate from just strictly a physical memory standpoint. And I didn't realize until I looked at this that memory was physical and spiritual. And then I'm like, okay, well, let me see if I can prove that. But then I didn't have to go too far because MRIs can measure your memory. So I was like, okay, yeah, that's true. So I didn't know the answer to that question. I didn't know that the answer was yes to that question until actually looking at all of these lessons. But can you elaborate on that, Pastor? Because you said yes pretty quick. And I'm going somewhere with this hope.
The idea of memory is both physical and spiritual, because once you see something, well, let me give you an example. I sat there and saw what was happening in Ukraine, and immediately my mind went to the timeline, how all of these things happened. My memory was spiritual as well as physical, because not only was I able to see the timeline and explain it in a physical way, I only saw it through the source of the eye. It is my spiritual understanding of it and my physical remembrance of it that gave me the opportunity to combine the two and come up with an understanding of what was taking place now. Make sense?
Yes, because that's where I was going next about, like taking that next step is really sharpening our memory, and it's not necessarily like how much you can remember, but it's also the spiritual aspect of it is recalling it when you need it to be recalled for that situation and seeing things. I realize that when you're sitting and you're being taught a lesson or being preached to, whatever we want to call it, you can be preached to, but I think I said earlier, you never really see yourself in a position of power. Because the message you're hearing, I don't visualize, well, I wasn't at that time visualizing myself in any part of it. I simply just tried to memorize it and think of the person, Abraham, whoever the topic was. But the reality is the power from us comes from like seeing ourselves in each aspect of it. And it just led me to this thing that God made promises and prophesied to us. And we just need to recall God's promises and know when to use it and accept our status that He's given us. But the part that we're blocking right now, or we block sometimes, is that we don't recall that promise. We don't recall our status of who we are. But then we still try to go and fix it in the name of God, if that makes sense. That's sort of like where I'm headed at. But our memories are physical and spiritual, but the biggest growth is when you can do it spiritually. And like I said earlier, I thought memory and remember were the exact same thing, but they're not. They're a little different, and they have different functions, and the way that we are supposed to use them is different, but they are supposed to work together. And if we can pull that together, that's going to be that's going to be a big play. I'm going to read just memory, for instance. Memory is defined as what has been learned and retained, especially through the association mechanism. Memory facilitates our mind and remembers information. So it's kind of like the power to process and reproduce or recalling. That's what memory is. There's three different definitions of memory. And the one that stands out to me, the power to process or reproduce or recalling. To remember is defined as one's mind being able to be aware of someone or something that one has seen or known or experienced in the past, to bring the mind to retain. So just looking at those two separately, you see they kind of have different functions, but when you're putting them to use, you can't use one without the other, but they are defined differently. So now think back to ourselves. What do we reproduce or recall? And if we're reproducing or recalling bad information, that kind of blocks us from really being aware of what's going on, or the person that we talked about earlier that we come across, or something that is seen or known and experienced. So you kind of need both to function. And really, if one is being used from one nature and the other one's being used from the spiritual nature, it's kind of hard balance it. So let's go back to that whole age sense and how the balance is two different natures. And I just wanted to kind of read that before we got into the memory discussion. Is there any questions or comments on that before we go? Because I know I've just said a lot, but I didn't know how to really transition that. But I felt like everything we were saying was kind of leading us to that point of understanding that in ourselves. But yeah, memory and remembering are really key when it comes to sharpening our tools. Yes, sir.
I have a statement about that, or something about that. When you mentioned that, the first thing came to my mind before you read, definition of it, is that memory sees an event, but it does not necessarily put it together in the sequence of how it happened. Remembering is putting it back together. I have memories from my childhood of things that happened, but the sequence that led up to that, I can't remember that. However, there are some things that happened in my childhood that I have a memory of, but also I know the sequence of it, which means that I am remembering it. I am putting it back together. Does that make sense?
Yes. So now, and that's exactly, so go even deeper with that spiritually. Go back to Genesis, we're created in the image and likeness of God. And so my point to say in that is that we've been given a certain sacred duty or we've been ordained in a certain way. And until we also recall that or bring that to a current mindset because it's in us, that we've been given these orders, we've been given these this anointing, this ordaining, we've been given a certain status. And that's why the reason I kind of went there, until we actually recall that and bring that to the forefront of everyday living, we're limiting ourselves, because you're basically not, in the way you do that is investing in yourself. But until we actually accept and invest in ourselves and gain that status, there's only so much investing we can do in others. So that was my point of, because God made so many promises and He's given us so many things that are here, but we haven't recalled it to the point where we can retain it and bring it back to our memory. So then we're still operating sort of in a physical memory at some point. And so that's why that component is so important for us to bring to the forefront, because it can measure what you're thinking in your memory when you're starting to recall things, just from simply an MRI. What if you have to recall something that's been imprinted in you and pull it up? Something maybe that you and that's where the meditation goes, and that's where the unfolding of the mysteries within ourselves happen. And so that's why I wanted to bring that part up, because we have been given a certain status and it's been promised to us, but until we actually uncover it and start developing that aspect of our memory, we're still operating with limits. Any questions or comments before we?
Yeah, I want to relate that to do this as often as you may in remembrance of me. The statement that Jesus made in reference to communion that has been misunderstood forever and a day. The way I see that statement is Jesus saying, take this communion as a reminder of all of the things that I did, or the things that I taught you, the things that you have learned. Yet, communion is given and received as a reminder of being a member of a church, as a reminder of being a Christian. when it has no, that was not the meaning of what he was saying. So if you have never known or been taught what he was teaching, then communion is certainly not going to be a reminder to you because you never had anything, you've never been taught what it meant in the first place. Does that make sense?
No, it does.
So in order to have a memory, something has to have taken place. And in order to remember it, then it has to be indelibly imprinted upon your mind for that to be brought back in the sequences of it, like the teachings that we can recall. I'm done.
Okay. So, yeah, and I'll look at it even from this perspective of us becoming aware of who we are. That awareness, like part of it's uncovering that identity and bringing it to, and so it's kind of like, it's there. How do I recall it? And it's almost like leaving yourself, for lack of a better term, breadcrumbs to follow the path back to where we are. And then, we say as you said last Monday about looking forward, looking ahead, but our future's our past. And that kind of stuck with me over the weekend and week. And it's because we're following those breadcrumbs back. When you're trying to, and another way that I took what you said Monday was, when we're trying to find out who we are, we're not looking ahead, we're not looking outside, we're backtracking, we're following the breadcrumbs back to see what was already done, if that makes sense. So I was looking at this from an awareness standpoint. When we get to the point of being aware of where Elohim and trying to operate in that regard, we have to, recall those aspects of what was promised to us along being that, and what was promised with the status of being Elohim, and then you start seeing the responsibility that we have and the power that's there. But and that's what I thought about when you said that last week. Our future is behind us, is because we're going back, following those breadcrumbs to allow ourselves to find out and invest in ourselves of who we are. And then you're sharpening your memory, you're sharpening your intuition, you're understanding all these things about yourself, and it just, we evolve as this, we evolve as Elohim daily, like you said. It's not a one step, I've got it, let me move on. It's a constant evolution of becoming that, if that makes sense.
Yes, this is Barbara. When you talk about following the breadcrumbs back, the sense of following the breadcrumbs back, if the memory is there and when we have it, it's encoded and it's stored somewhere, and it's almost like it's covered in a sense, like a subconscious kind of thing. But what you're saying is that we have to actively be able to retrieve what has been, what that memory is. It's like, in other words, there are things that have happened in our lives that we call coincidences. But now that we know who we are and what we are, those coincidences are not coincidences. They're part of the fabric of something greater than us. In other words, the fabric of connection of persons, places, thoughts, all of those things are interconnected. And so we can no longer say that what a coincidence that is. Now that we are further back in terms of following the breadcrumbs, so to speak, and understand more, then we need to not label this as the same way we would label it when we did not know more. So there are no coincidences. When things occur, then they're there to capture our attention for whatever reason, for some reason. So that's just what I thought about when you talked about following the breadcrumbs back.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome because.
Excuse me, guys. I got to leave the session. I'm gonna have to leave the session. However, Janice has some things to present to us at the end of the session. Okay. I regret that, but I have to go. All right. I just want to.
Thank you. And Barbara, one of the things I definitely wanted to get to too is that when we hear these lessons, moving forward, we have to see ourselves as Elohim within the lesson that's being taught, whatever it is. And the way we see ourselves is, if Pastor's given us, taught us something, Barbara or Kathy, the way you see yourself in it is going back and reviewing it for yourself, because we learn best by visual and verbal. But we have to kind of transition that to a visual, verbal, spiritual message. And so in other words, like, you have to visualize yourself within the message, especially when we're trying to develop ourselves through whatever we're hearing through a sense, or we're trying to develop into it. We have to see ourselves in the message, because we learn best verbally and visually combined. So we got to take that verbal lesson and go back within ourselves that we can recap it and apply it to ourselves, but also see ourselves doing it, and we'll learn best by that. And an example of that is, like, we talk about this dual coding. Everything we do in this earth is that they want you to, if they want you to remember something, they're going to put it in a certain color. And if you hear it and see it at the same time, it's been proven that you're going to remember it longer. It's going to stick with you. That's why they do the weather forecast the way they do. They put 7 days up, and they're like, hey, today is Saturday, but they're telling you, hey, on Thursday, it's going to rain. So they got a picture of the rain cloud, and they got a picture of the sun there, and they're telling you the forecast, and then they emphasize, hey, Thursday it's going to rain, even though it's Saturday, we're projecting rain. And so you don't have to go back during that week and backtrack and say, okay, what's the weather going to be like Thursday? Because that picture and that verbal message has been ingrained in us that we know, okay, 5-day forecast, hey, it's calling for rain Thursday, calling for snow. So it's kind of like, and then we see the same thing with direction signs and the highways, whatever. So psychologically, we've been conditioned already for verbal and visual learning. So when we do this spiritually, week in and week out, when we go back, we meditate, we have to imprint that on our hearts and also see ourselves in that message to actually make it stick even more. And this is just, like I said, one of the 8 ways to sharpen ourselves to be able to function more in the 8th sense in Elohim. But that's just a point I was just trying to make. I hope it didn't go too far, but verbally hear the message and visualize yourself within that message and see it, and it sticks with us longer as well.
So when Barbara talks about paying attention, Barbara, you're not just talking about the physical. We're to pay attention on what's inside of us as well, right?
Exactly, because if you pay attention, you are pricked from the inside. That forces you to pay attention to the outside. You see what I'm saying? Something inside of you might say, okay, look over to the right, look over to blah, blah, blah. And because of what you hear inside, it creates the action for you to take outside, potentially.
In relationship to that, are spiritual memories connected to dreams then? Because I know the Creator spoke
They are
to
dreams.
Okay.
They are dreams.
Yes. Yes, going back to that first week too, there are dreams, and then we talked about being able to understand them more, and being able to draw power from that, because we just have to pay attention to them always and then understand them and try to put them in perspective. But definitely that sharpens. That's another way to sharpen that 8th sense to get us going to the point of where like your awareness level is, you're super sensitive, you're heightened. You may be a 4 now, but what if you can take your awareness and sensitivity to a 10, and paying attention to dreams, understanding that, and even going what Barbara said, like internalize that too, because we hear it, but we have to internalize it for ourselves and make the impact from inside out. But definitely the dreams, the memories. I think Audrey made a point about the wisdom. Those are all things that Jesus did, and he always went back to. He listened to people. He brought things back and he internalized it. So he was also being able to deliver his message in a way that it resonated with people, and all those things are inside of us too. Those are things we have to do to make our message resonate when we're speaking, but also just our daily walk should just be from the perspective of Elohim. And it's just all these things that will help us constantly grow and sharpen those skills to do that daily walk. I mean, it's funny, I hear the slogans that we used to have in church, and how they would just say things like, walk with Jesus, just different. But when you break it down, the hows of it, that's what we're doing now, to really, it doesn't even like scratch the surface of what we used to hear, because now it's real for each person, each individual. I guess that's the overall thing I keep trying to convey, that it's make it real for your own individual journey, so that it's easier for you to develop and produce this when needed. But it's also going to help the overall connection that we all have. I thought someone else was trying to say something else.
Hey, Ed, I don't want to take you from your lesson. I just want to ask a question. They said there was 8 or 7 earthquakes during the time the bombing of that country that Russia's trying to take. Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't, Charles, and I know that just from talking to some friends who were in the Army years ago, and I had this one friend that he was at this place called the Aberdeen Proving Grounds. But I do know that there are bombs and missiles that are designed to really shake up the earth, so to say. Like they can create a lot of craters, and I can't remember the technical name of one of those bombs, but it does, when it hits, it does feel like there's an earthquake going. I don't know, but it's haven't really been reading in too much detail about the war itself, just the people that are trying to leave. I've been reading more about that. But if anyone else has read on the earthquakes, but from a physical standpoint, I know that there are bombs that are designed to like have an after effect even after they go off. There's more of the way they're designed to impact the earth when they hit. But I haven't read about the earthquakes yet.
Okay, thank you. If you do, anyone, let me know, because I be wanting to understand stuff myself now more than anything.
I do know, like when I looked at the promises that were made and the things that God prophesied to us and the ability that we had to make an impact. Like Pastor said, there's going to be some things that come out because of the way things are being exposed from a spiritual standpoint. This whole thing, you just hope that it's and I pray for, like, we don't want lives lost, but there's just so much on you just praying for lives. One day there's a ceasefire and you think, okay, there's gonna, and so we just be able to let it run its course, kind of pray for the outcome that's going to happen, and you just hate for the people that are there, and hopefully this thing will, I hadn't really been feeling a certain way of how to interject, because it seems like every day there's something different, and so I'm just praying for basically let it end peacefully as best as possible at this point now. And because the physical damage is done, like these people are going to have to rebuild their homes. They're going to have to relocate for a long time. And I don't know, ultimately, if it's going to lead to more of an intervention from either side, from people on the outside. And it sort of goes back to where we're talking now, like externally on both sides, they're going to have to see each other as Elohim. It's just going to have to be internally they're going to have to see each other as equals and who they are, and resolve this thing internally, because otherwise, what's to say it won't happen again? So the ultimate solution has to come from the inside, that they see each other as equals and they see, the Elohim in each other. Because if it's just an external ceasefire or whatever, it's not going to end that way. So the solution has to come internally. I do know that, and it has to. Basically, what we're saying today and what we've been saying for the last couple of weeks, it has to be where they see each other as Elohim and equals, ultimately, to make this thing end in the proper way. And any comments on that? Anybody has anything else to add on that?
Barbara, only for the first time in this century has there been war, in the 21st century, I'm sorry, and has there been war in Europe, and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. So if we see the pattern in that, we have to believe that there are going to be people who pick up on what's in the macro about we are our brother's keeper, and that our brother is not just, our brother doesn't just look just like we do. Excuse me. Our brother is every single person that has to go through something similar, who's persecuted by anyone, whether it's in Sudan or wherever else. In the macro, it's gotta be something that people capture, take hold of, and this will serve as a remembrance for them of what they went through, and that there were people who were kind. But not only that, there may be the opportunity in the future for people experiencing this now who have to give back in a sense, if you will, be responsive to another group of people, humanity, that desires the same thing, the same kind of freedom, the same kind of fear from death, those kinds of things by your own people, the same kind of fear from death by any other people. And so out of this, I mean, we have seen things happen in just intensely huge ways that impact the planet, like the pandemic. Well, you've got to see the same thing in this, that although unfortunately there's so many people who are affected, that because of what's happening to them, it's going to impact more people on the planet in the long run for the good.
I always wonder about the different diplomacies, and it makes the world smaller when war happens too. It seems like everything's connected. The pandemic made the world smaller because we were all connected. And I don't know. I just saw something. I didn't read the article. Something flashed over my phone that someone was detained. One of the WNBA players was detained at a Russian airport. And it just made me think this now that there are American citizens over in Russia living too. I mean, and so it makes the world a lot smaller, and it makes you realize that this is a big world, but really, it's a small place. The connection is so much faster now than it was 20 years ago because of cameras and social media's technology has made it such a small place. And like you said, Barbara, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it is going to make it it's just going to make it a better place, and we just have to be focused on that and trying to, just be who we are at this time and whatever we need to be for it. In the war in general, I mean, if you think back to our country, how close were we to some sort of civil unrest the last couple of years? But it didn't happen outright, but there's always the underlying tension no matter where you are. And that's why we always have to be who we are, because there's always an underlying tension. And then sometimes things that keep those tensions under control are people doing what they're supposed to be doing in a given situation from a spiritual standpoint. But hopefully those tensions get eased sooner than later over there, and they all realize that they are their brother's keepers, ASAP. So I hope that helps. I don't know the question as far as the earthquakes, but I hope that's kind of helped everybody's perspective. It's difficult. It's very difficult, and in the past, it was always us saying, well, that's so far away. And now that, now everything seems so close. And then now we also see all the other aspects of racism and inequalities even popping up in the times of this war. So I think, like what Rev said before he left, like that's just going to bring all these things to the forefront for the world to deal with, not just one country, but for the world to deal with and intervene to make this thing better. That's trying to okay. Yeah, one other thing I wanted to go back to too before we when we were talking about memory and remember. Did anyone have any questions about the ordained aspect of us being given the status or orders? Because that was as we go forward and talking about memory and being able to remember, we are, I would say, we all are, for lack of a better term, preordained. And we all have something that was given to us. And that's what we talked about, going back from the breadcrumbs. As each individual goes back and follows their own breadcrumbs to who they are, and we begin to evolve from what we found out, comes with, once you find that status out, it comes with certain responsibilities that we'll talk about, in the future. But that was something that I just, it's so much there. You don't want to go left or right too far, but you see all the examples that were given, from Jesus to David to Abraham to Moses. All of these examples were given, and I had to step back and not just see them from a physical standpoint or from just a man standpoint, but from a standpoint of someone being promised something, and they spiritually accepted that, and they acted on that promise and prophecy. And once they acted on that promise and prophecy, they were given a power that kind of changed the course of humanity. And that's what I'm trying to get us to, that point of, once we accept all this power and responsibility, it's going to help us change the course of humanity. And just like, he saw everything that David went through, but once he accepted that, he changed the course of humanity. Abraham, once he accepted it, it changed the course of humanity. Jesus, he changed the course of humanity. So that's sort of the responsibility that we're given once we start realizing this in our walk every day. So that's definitely something for us to think about moving forward, and hopefully that tomorrow we can build on that too, and just kind of get better day in and day out, understanding who we are and how we work together, how the pieces fit, how we interact with people, and how that interaction leads us to a connection that we should have. As Pastor said earlier, everyone's not going to get to that level of connection, but we just have to be at the point where we're constantly improving, evolving, and being who we are. And don't worry about how many receive, just worry that people are receiving. I guess is the easiest, simplest way to look at it. But any other questions for today? I didn't want to go into the Jesus Melchizedek aspect of it today because it would take us, but we can definitely pick up from the memory and the remembering aspect of the eighth sense and sharpening the tools combined. And also remember that all of these senses serve us in a certain way that we're constantly evolving. It's kind of like a transitioning from one to the other. It's not that you don't need anything else, but it's just about building up on the journey. But any other questions for that today?
This is Angela. I just wanted, when you talk about remembrance, the scripture, John 14:26, that says, "But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things, to bring all things to your remembrance, all that I have said to you." That's what came to my remembrance when you were talking about remembrance. I just wanted to say that.
Oh, thank you. Because remember that aspect that you brought up is about, what guides us, what guides you. And just remember, with that Galatians verse 2 that it talked about, who walks in the Spirit will have the privilege of God's own perspective on life, decisions, and he is guided through his own spiritual reception. And those are the things we're talking about through medication, through influence. Because, if you're, and you have different levels, the Holy Spirit was sort of was sent as a guide. And once you get to that point of understanding yourself, the journey takes a turn because we get to that point now. You have to internalize it. So I'm glad you brought that up because we have to internalize that. and really set ourselves on a path. And it's a different path, but it's all connected. It's kind of like all roads lead to a certain place. And the quicker we understand how to guide ourselves, it's going to be a little easier, and it becomes a little easier to understand and keep gaining that wisdom and understanding and the growth. But if we don't do it for ourselves and we'll listen to the message, we're waiting on the next message, it takes a little longer, it takes a little more time to develop. But ultimately, we're going to get to the point where there's going to be a door in front of us. Well, not literally, but we have to open that door and close it behind ourselves and try to figure out and grow on the other side of it, and then come back out of that door to connect with mankind to make things better. I'm kind of bad at analogies there, but thank you for that comment too, because there is a lot of guidance with it. Anything else? I think that's a good stopping point there. I don't want to go too far on the other side, because there's a lot of different little aspects of the memory and how we use it in religion and how that was sort of a roadblock for us. But any other questions? If not, I think that's a good stopping point for today. And so I appreciate the comments and questions. I know we kind of scattered a little bit there, but I really wanted to lay that foundation, the memory aspect and recalling. But I do think that's probably a good spot to stop today. And just think about it this afternoon too, and get some time to just cross your mind. Think about how we have evolved, and do we recall God's promises to us? And also the other question is, do we understand our status with the Creator right now? We have to understand what our status means and what He's actually given us. But if no other questions, we can wrap it up for today, and look forward to talking to everyone tomorrow.